Which classic sci-fi series does this episode take its name from? And what can we expect to see in this season's finale? We'll be covering these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. This episode will look at episode 9 of season 2 of Severance, called After Hours. I'll recap everything that happened in the episode, then do an in-depth review of the major storylines, pick my favourite line, cover any trivia, and look ahead to the upcoming final episode of the season. There are bookmarks in the description if you want to skip ahead to any of these sections, but first let's jump straight into the recap. We start the episode with Jame Eagan having a morning swim. We see a recreation of the moment she was dunked in the water in the Oddbow episode, and there's a close-up of the clock on the wall to symbolise that the time is ticking on this season's events. Helena then has a lovely breakfast where she laughs and jokes with her dad. Not really, it's awkward and really weird. They have no rapport, and Jame Eagan seems like an absolute lunatic. Helena, while eating the tiniest of bites from her half an egg, tells Jame that they're going to see to Irving, which isn't very specific, but it doesn't rule out murder. Next we find out that Miss Huang's first name is Eustace, and that she's been awarded the Wintertide Fellowship, which means she's going to be shipped out to the middle of nowhere to start another posting. Miss Huang seems less than delighted, and says she thought that she might stay until the end of the quarter, but she's going to have to leave at the end of the day, and Milchick looks pretty pleased that she's on her way. He's even happy when he tells her that she's got to sacrifice her water game. He smashes it with her new wooden head. Over at Gretchen and Dylan's, they're both getting ready for work when Gretchen confesses to kissing innie Dylan. It goes down badly, as Dylan sees it as his wife cheating on himself, with himself. Then Irving comes home to see Radar acting strangely. It's because Burt has let himself in and is reading through Irving's secret notes about him. From the notes we find out that Irving suspects Burt is a Severance enforcer, and may be involved in suspicious deaths and disappearances in the area. Burt then asks Irving if he wants to go for a ride, in a way that suggests it might not be good for his health if he says no. Back at the Lumen building, Dr. Mauer sees that the Cold Harbour file is at 96%, but isn't moving any closer to completion. He complains to Mr. Drummond, who immediately gets on the phone to Milchick to tell him that he needs to get on it, because the file is expected to be completed today. The reason the numbers aren't moving is because Mark is bunking off work with his sister. They've set up a clandestine meeting in the woods with Cobel. Mark still doesn't trust Cobel, but Devon is investing in using her to help them. Helly is worried about Mark when he doesn't show up for work, so she goes to Milchick for answers. Milchick gives her no information, so Helly gives him a load of attitude. He continues to get no respect from anyone this season. Despite Outie Dylan asking Gretchen not to follow him to work and carry on with his innie, she's meeting back with innie Dylan. Though she tells him this will be her last visit, because Outie Dylan might quit if they keep meeting, which would effectively kill the innie Dylan. Innie Dylan then makes a big play to keep Gretchen coming to see him, even proposing to her with an engagement ring made out of a finger trap. She leaves though, and Dylan is left heartbroken. Helly tries to comfort Dylan, but he's distraught. She then tries to convince him that his real family is the MDR team, and they need to honour Irving's wish for them to explore the dark corridor. They talk about the difference between outies and innies, with Dylan thinking that they're more or less the same, and Helly believing that they're completely different. Dylan brings up the fact that they didn't notice when Helena took over Helly's life, cruelly referencing Mark not realising he was sleeping with the wrong Helly on the Oddbow. Cobel turns up in the truck she borrowed in the Salt's Neck episode. She meets Mark and Devon, and we find out that they're going to follow Devon's plan of using the birthing retreat to talk to Mark's innie. She also tells them that Gemma is not likely to be alive after Cold Harbour is completed. Mark almost backs out of the collaboration with Cobel, but Devon talks him around, though they're really going out of their way to emphasise the lack of trust on each side of this alliance. Then we see Burt driving Irving somewhere, and he confesses that he used to drive people to locations on behalf of Lumen, but didn't engage in any violence himself. Irving asks if that's what he's doing with him right now, but he cuts away before there's a response. We then cut to Dylan filling out his resignation form. Milchick is less than impressed with Dylan, but Miss Huang apologises and says that she could have facilitated better. Milchick quickly shuts this conversation down though. Clearly she's not meant to be saying things like that. Mr. Drummond then gives Milchick a dressing down for Mark not coming into work, and when Milchick thanks him for the remonstration, Drummond angrily pulls him up for using a complicated word, and then keeps on berating him. In the end, Milchick cracks and is exceptionally rude to Drummond, and tells him that he deserves more respect for his work managing the severed floor. He then points out that Mark's gone missing in his life outside of the severed floor, so it's Drummond's fault for him not showing up. Mark then calls into Milchick and explains that he's not coming in because he's got life stuff to do. He tells Milchick that Lumen is all about balance between work and life. This seems to hit Milchick hard, but he recovers enough to make Mark promise to come in the next day. However, his eyes are full of tears and his voice is trembling, maybe because Milchick has been forced to work for Lumen as a child and never developed a life outside the company. Then we're at the railway station, where Burt buys Irving a ticket so he can run away. Rather than doing Lumen's bidding, he's letting Irving get away, most likely at great personal cost. They both talk about their feelings for each other, or their innie's feelings for each other. Irving then suggests that they kiss, but Burt resists. This reverses the roles from last season, when Burt wanted to kiss Irving, but Irving said no. They say goodbye with a handshake instead. The train then comes and takes Irving and Radar away. At the same time, Dylan leaves the severed floor, potentially for the last time. Miss Huang's shuttle bus comes to take her away, and Mark hides in the back of Cobel's truck so he can sneak into the birthing retreat. There's also a shot of the lift from the testing floor pinging, but we don't see anyone come out. Helly's still at work, putting in extra time to try and memorise the directions to the testing floor. While she's doing this, a shadowy figure appears in the background. It's Jame Eagan, and it seems that he's come up from the testing floor. He tells Helly that she tricked him. Then Cobel talks away past security at the birthing retreat. Devon's theory was correct, and Mark turns into his innie once he's in the cabin. Devon leads him upstairs, where Cobel is looking just about as creepy as it's possible to be. Devon asks him to remember the last thing that he said to her, and he replies, "She's alive," repeating the cliffhanger ending from season 1. Then the credits roll. After a couple of episodes that veered away from the show's usual format, this episode felt like a return to the usual Severance. The pace was quicker in this episode, but they had the usual look and feel of a Severance episode, as well as getting us back to the storylines that have mostly been on hold for the last 2 episodes while we delved deep into the backstories of Gemma and Cobel. After meandering off course a little, this episode felt like a return to form, and there was a lot going on in this one. Let's take a look at everything we found out in this episode. The not so subtle hints that Burt worked for Lumen turned out to be true, but his feelings for Irving won out over his loyalty to the company. I'm pleased that Burt's shady work for Lumen only involved him being a driver for them. His hands aren't exactly clean if he was facilitating the darker activities Lumen get up to, but he's not a master villain either, more of a henchman. You could even argue that by allowing Irving to get away, he's somewhat redeemed himself. He was sad that Irving and Burt didn't connect on the outside world in the way that they did on the inside. The feeling seems to be there between them, but their circumstances are different. Because this is a show that twists and turns regularly, it won't be a huge surprise if Irving popped up again in the finale. While in theory he's running away and will never be seen again, we also know it's connected to some anti-Lumen group and could just get off the train and go straight back to Kia, despite Burt's warnings. Gretchen had a difficult decision to make with Innie Dillon. While he doesn't want to stop seeing her, she knows that keeping up the meetings with him could make Outie Dillon quit, and then Innie Dillon will never be seen again. Only her rejection of him led to him resigning anyway, and effectively ending his existence. One thing I found interesting was how Innie Dillon promised Gretchen that he could give her a life. I have no idea what this could possibly mean, but he's stuck on the inside of the Lumen building. Perhaps he wanted her to become severed too, so she could join them on the inside, which would bring a new meaning to the phrase work wife. The alliance between Cobel, Mark and Devon seems flimsy at best. Mark is saying what everyone else is thinking when he says Cobel can't be trusted, but out of desperation it seems that they're going to work together. There's an expression that goes, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," which I think sums up this situation. For now, Cobel's anti-Lumen feelings line up with Mark's, and he's a useful tool to her. He'll be the least surprising plot twist ever if she flips on him and turns him over to Lumen. Maybe Cobel genuinely helping them and turning on her old employer will be the most interesting way to take her character. She has been indoctrinated into the Kia religion from an early age, but they also exploited her as a child, didn't give her credit for her brilliant work, and then dumped her when things weren't going to plan. She's got more than enough reasons to resent the company and help Mark to sabotage their work. It was nice to see more of Jame Eagan in this episode. Hopefully we'll find out more about why he went to visit Helly on the 7th floor in the final episode, but I doubt it was just a social visit. In the finale of season 1, he told Helly that he cried in his bed when he found out what her innie had tried to do to her, referring to her attempt to hang herself. Only it was Helly he was speaking to at this point, not Helena, because of the overtime contingency. So I think this is what he was referring to in the episode when he said Helly had tricked him, but who knows what his mad old man's thinking. Staying with Lumen senior management, it was great to see Milchick finally reach breaking point and stand up to Mr. Drummond. Despite Milchick being a terrifying character at times, I actually felt sorry for him in this episode. He's civil to everyone, even in the face of extreme provocation, and every single person he deals with in this episode disrespects him somehow. We've seen glimpses of Milchick's brooding dissatisfaction with his employer building over this season. I'm pleased he's finally asserted himself. However, Mr. Drummond most likely will seek some sort of consequence for Milchick, so I don't think things are over between these two. Miss Huang getting packed off has come as a bit of a shock too. She's been a thorn in the side of Milchick this season, so I wonder if endorsing her Wintertide scholarship was his way of getting rid of her. He may even have tried to time it so that she wasn't there when the Cold Harbour file was completed, so she doesn't get any credit. I really enjoyed this episode, and I feel it did a good job of nudging all the various storylines from this season along. It probably won't be a standout episode of this season, like the Otbo or Gemma episodes, but it still had some memorable moments and pulled me right back into the story. My favourite line in this episode came from Milchick, where he told Mr. Drummond to devour feculence in response to his boss goading him. Using these complicated words was a brilliant way to assert himself. It's mad that this season has made me feel sorry for Milchick, but hopefully we'll see more rebellion from him in the last episode of the season. The name of this episode was taken from the Twilight Zone episode, which is called The After Hours. It's a story about department store mannequins that come to life, and one of them has been allowed to go out into the outside world and comes back to the store forgetting that she's a mannequin. Obviously there are similarities between this story and the innies in the 7th floor. There's another nod to this episode when Cobel tells a guard that Devon is Marsha White, the name of the main character in the Twilight Zone episode. The gold thimble, 9th floor, and specialities department all feature in that episode too. It's hard to tell if Cobel is using code words with the guard or if she's talking about a fictional person from Lumen. During the weird breakfast meeting with Helena and her father, it seemed like they made a big show of Helena not eating very much. It's possible she didn't feel hungry because her dad was creepily watching her eat, but I wonder if she struggled to eat because she had morning sickness. Mark could have got either Helly or Helena pregnant when he shared vessels with them, so this theory might not be so crazy. When Milchick told Miss Huang that she was going to Svalbard, I thought it was a made-up place, but it's a real location. It's a group of islands that are halfway between Norway and the North Pole. Luma do seem to love locations that are out in the middle of nowhere. When Milchick asks Helly to keep the door open and she slams it shut, it mirrors a scene from the first season. Mark asks Cobel if she'd like the door open or shut, and she angrily replies both. I think this was a deliberate decision to show how Milchick being nice has led to the innies walking all over him, whereas Cobel intimidated and abused the innies, and they lived in fear of her. In case you missed them, Dylan's reasons for resigning were anger, boredom, fatigue, loneliness, guilt, shame, annoyance, and something else that we didn't see in the shot. There's a box at the bottom of the form for his outie's response, so it's possible that Dylan's outie will reject his resignation, like Elena did to Helly in the last season. Although the way this scene played out, with Dylan handing over his pass, it seemed like they were making it look like Dylan had finished on the severed floor, but I have a feeling he'll reappear at some point. The way that Cobel said that she's one of James to the security guard suggests that Helena may have a host of illegitimate brothers and sisters. While we didn't need any more reasons to hate Lumen, it seems that they have an established protocol for dealing with the time senior management impregnate staff members. Looking ahead to the season finale, we already know it's going to be 74 minutes long and called Cold Harbour. This episode has hinted what's likely to happen in the final episode too. Mark's innie conspiring with Devon and Cobel suggests that he'll be sent down to the severed floor to carry out some sort of mission, and Helly memorising the directions to the testing floor points towards her and Mark taking a trip down to the testing floor to try and find Gemma. I also think that Mark's reintegration is going to come into the story significantly too, as otherwise it won't have really impacted the story much so far. Maybe he'll start flicking between his innie and outie at the worst possible moment. We'll also find out if Dylan's resignation is being accepted, or whether it's really over between him and Gretchen. Irving was on a train away, but he could easily come back too, and Milchick is angry with the company and letting his feelings out more, which could have a bearing on how things play out. We also might find out if Cobel is really helping Mark and Devon, or whether she's still on Lumen's side. Even with a longer runtime, it feels like there's a lot to get through in the final episode of this season. It'll also be interesting to see which doors they leave open for season 3. If Gemma is saved and they all escape the Lumen offices, it'll be hard to see how they can pick up the pieces and start again with season 3. So there'll most likely be some teasing of what we can expect in the next season, which has already been given the green light by Apple TV. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you've enjoyed this video, you may want to check out my other Severance videos, which should be showing on the screen now. I'll be back with another video for the season finale shortly after it airs. Please subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. Goodbye.